recent days, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not there should be a no-fly zone over Ukraine. But it's really just talk, rhetoric, because NATO cannot establish a no-fly zone in Ukraine. A no-fly zone means patrolling the skies with lots of jet fighters, and the minute a NATO fighter shoots down a Russian airplane flying over Ukraine territory, we'll soon be in World War III. No-fly zones prevent a country from using warplanes to attack military targets or civilians on the ground. In the case of the Russian invasion into Ukraine, NATO would be responsible for patrolling the area with its own planes and would have to be prepared to fire at enemy planes to ensure the safety of those civilians on the ground. NATO would be flying dozens of aircraft, maybe hundreds of aircraft, over Ukraine to protect targets and civilian population, and then we'd be shooting at Russians and they'd be shooting at us. While NATO can't and won't send fighter jets, does that mean, however, that it can't send in drones? I'm told that we do have 300 MQ-9 Reaper unmanned aerial vehicles. Would it be illegal to transfer that fleet to Ukraine and the Ukrainians use them as they like, even perhaps painting them with blue and yellow flag colors? Would it be illegal to give the UAVs to a non-NATO country for that country to give to Ukraine? And should that be okay, would it also be okay to help Ukraine's civilians on the ground, instructing them just how to fly UAV missions, and then let them have at it? I'm Terry Gilberg, and this is Timeline with Terry. Today's Timeline topic, war games, systems and strategies when we're not the ones at war. I'll be right back.
CTA is a call to action to all conservatives to save America from left-wing radicals.
Nearly 45% of the U.S. workforce already have plans for job hopping in 2021. Now, many of those 70 million job hoppers are just fed up and they're ready to work somewhere else, somewhere where they will be free. Maybe it's time for your talents to go to a city or a company that actually values your freedom. Post your resume on redballoon.work so that you can connect with this ever-growing list of free speech employers who would love to hire you.
All right, guys, you have signed up, right? You've joined freedomsquare.com. If you haven't, why not? This should have happened a decade ago. How did somebody not think of this earlier? If you're a business owner, we have a business directory to promote your business to patriots across the nation. So if you want to buy American, if you want to sell American, we have a business directory. Whatever it is, go now.
Join us in the fight for freedom. Welcome to Freedom Square.
Welcome back to Timeline with Terry. As Russia advances into Ukraine and as the Ukraine leadership and people beg for more support, what can we do, bearing in mind that we're part of NATO, to help them militarily, if at all? This is the show that goes deep and broad with professionals and other experts and allows them time to explain their positions. How to fight a war while not being at war, but supporting a country who is at war with a bigger country that has engaged them in war, and that bigger country being Russia. Russia moving in on them more and more every day, that's the situation. So how does NATO thread this needle anyway? And finally, would it be legal to arm Q-9 Reaper UAVs with Stinger missiles? These are just some of the questions for military men, I suppose, so I've invited a Major General retired. Troy Koch is on the program with us to talk about it. General Koch is a qualified Army aviator, having experience in flying Huey, Black Hawk, and Apache Longbow helicopters. He's also a logistics expert, transportation manager, human resource manager, and a teacher. He was the commanding general of all of the Army Reserve Aviation and was responsible for the command, the control, the directing of operations and training, the force development and management of all Army aviation units. The enormity of this command involved the lives of over 4,000 uniformed personnel and over 600 civilian personnel in support of Army transformation in the global war on terror. He also had a second division, which is worth mentioning. It spanned a region of 13 northeastern states and the District of Columbia, and it involved base operations and mission readiness for over 44,000 Army Reserve soldiers and 110,000 family members. At the time, he administered that command of an operating budget of over $150 million. Presently, Major General retired Koch is running for political office, Judge Executive in Meade County, Kentucky. Welcome to the program, General. So nice to have you as we talk about war games. How are you?
I am doing fantastic, Terry. Thank you so much for this opportunity to come on and talk with you today.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and we do want your expertise. So let's start with this idea of drones. I am told drones are being used every day by Ukrainians over their own airspace, and here's how they're doing it, so I've been told. They equip these drones with Molotov cocktails. So they're there on the ground making a bunch of Molotov cocktails, and then they get them into drones. Even the New York Post did a fantastic article on this. Good way to fight against the Russians? Everyday civilian can do this?
Well, when we look at, and you brought up initially the no-fly zone, and so I think it's important for us to understand what a no-fly zone is, and we keep on talking about establishing a no-fly zone. Okay, well, first, when you look at how the Russians came in, and you look at Ukraine, their air forces are entirely different. Ukraine has basically nothing in comparison to the Russian Air Force. Initially, when the Russians attacked, what you want to achieve is what we call air superiority. Okay, so, and air superiority goes ahead and it basically takes out all of the other opponents' aircraft so that they cannot overfly and or interdict any of your forces as they come in. So with saying that, the Russians never did that, okay? The Russians never launched an overall assault of their air fighters into Ukraine. Now, there are aircraft that are flying in there, but it's not it's not that overall takeover of air superiority that you normally would see upon attack. And so, when we talk about the no-fly zone, the issue has been who can manage that no-fly zone. And so, there's conversation, well, the United States can do it, or, well, NATO can do it. The problem with a no-fly zone is it's exactly what it says, no-fly. Mm-hmm. So whoever is doing the no-fly zone, whoever establishes the no-fly zone, has to have the ability and or the law on their side to be able to interdict the other country that is actually flying. A great example of that is when we made a no-fly zone in Iraq to protect the Kurds, because what was happening was Saddam Hussein was flying aircraft in and dropping chemical weapons, on the Kurds and so on. So we established a no-fly zone, even though it was into Iraq. We established and said, hey, no aircraft from your country is allowed to fly into that, because it was a humanitarian issue that we were trying to protect. But we were able to enforce that based off of the war that we'd had. So when we look at this case, the problem set is who could establish that no-fly zone? Mm-hmm. And you hit the nail right on the head. If NATO is involved with it and they shoot down a Russian aircraft, now you're interdicting, and you have two superpowers now
fighting. Engaged. Right.
Okay. If the United States does it, it's the same issue. So again, mm-hmm. whoever is flying that no-fly zone has to have the capability and the law behind them to be able to interdict any aircraft that would be flying in there and be able to basically shoot them down. There is no country in NATO that can do that. The only ones that can protect themselves would be the Ukrainian forces. Because since Ukraine is at war with Russia, it's not really a no-fly zone. It's an engagement between two countries that are in a fight. So, when I say I think we need to take that term no-fly zone off, because it's not really a no-fly zone. It's a matter of interdiction and who is going to win in air superiority to keep airplanes out of the sky.
Well, let me. That begs this question, at least in my mind, General. Is there any kind of international moral code, or even something, even a moral code, an ethic code, even higher than how the military and heads of state discuss these things, maybe God's morals, God's code, that says one country can proceed with a no-fly zone over another country? I've seen some writing on this, and there's debate on a lot of different sides. What would the United States be doing telling Ukraine, we're going to come and establish a no-fly zone over your land? And by the same token, Russia now is coming in, and what the heck are they doing? This is our land. And by extension, our space upward, that airspace is ours as well. So is there any kind of, where is the debate on this? Who's got the moral authority to establish a no-fly zone or not establish a no-fly zone?
Well, again, the no-fly zone would be established so so that no power has air superiority to be able to interdict ground forces and or civilians, okay, because that's happening in Ukraine also. And so that's kind of where you would get into why you would establish the no-fly zone. The problem set is that you've got Russia and you've got Ukraine. It's Ukrainian borders that the Russians have crossed over, therefore they're inside of Ukraine. Ukraine has to protect their borders.
Sure.
And anytime another country would come into that, now you're bringing in a third party into this war. And I think that's the problem set, that as I hear people talk about no-fly zone, that I don't quite understand why we would call it a no-fly zone. I don't think we could set a no-fly zone, because if NATO's involved, and again, the whole purpose for a no-fly zone is if somebody flies into that zone,
exactly,
you shoot them down.
It defeats it. Right.
The last thing we want to do, or NATO or the United States, is to shoot down a Russian aircraft, because now that brings us into a war, as you alluded to, when we open this discussion up.
Right.
So, again, I think, when I look at I'm going to bring this back, what the Ukrainians can do is we can always give them, arms, again, Stinger missiles,
javelins,
all those things, but they're the ones that have to interdict, because they're the country at war with the invader.
Right. Okay. When I booked you for this show, we had a nice discussion, and one of the things that takeaway things you said to me is, anytime you go to war, you have to have a lot of goals, but the super goal is, what in the hell is the objective anyway?
Right.
All right. So now I look at Russia, and Russia, as you just aptly put, set out and said, is that Russia did not take over their airspace. They did not come in and show air superiority right away. Russia seems to be, at least in my observation, coming in and saying, we told you we'd come in. Now we're here. We're coming with a lot of tanks. Hello, are you noticing? We'll still come to the table. But when we come to the table, we want you to concede the point that you will never, Ukraine, become part of NATO. And so they came in hard, maybe not as hard as they could. They didn't take over Kiev right away. In fact, at this taping, it's not taken over. But they've done a lot of bloodshed along the way and a lot of bombing along the way. And then the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, says, wait a minute, okay, a little bit, white flag, we'll talk. And he's had 2 of these sessions to talk. They haven't conceded, and Russia goes and boom, boom, boom again. It seems like a slow drip to me, General. And it seems like that's on purpose. Whereas perhaps normal, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, normal strategy would be what you just said. Get in there, take over the airspace. It's a war. We're coming in full steam ahead. We're using everything that we can, and we're going to, obliterate you. And you are going to, you're going to wave the white flag, and within a week, it's ours. That's not what we're seeing. So it seems to me it's the drip, 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 and that is a strategy. How does it look to you?
Well, I think it's a little bit more confusing that, because when you look at what Russia is from the political side, you're hearing one issue, okay? The things that you brought up, the goals that Putin wants to have take place in Ukraine, for them to capitulate on certain things, conditions. If you might want to say, one of them is not that they would not belong to NATO. Another one is the Crimea would be turned over, and they would recognize that. And there's some other states up there that they want Ukraine to recognize as a part of Russia. And so, that's from the political side. Now, it's interesting as I watch, and again, news is what it is. We're not over there. But when I listen to
Good point.
and I watch, what's going on with all these different reports, and cell phones are really nice because they take a whole bunch of pictures and they're not edited, so you can kind of see some certain things that are going on. So I think what was told to Russian troops is different than what was told than what the Russian hierarchy is talking about. So from what I hear, again, and this is listening to people, soldiers that were captured, looking at video clips of people walking in front of a tank and a tank stopping.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I saw some of that.
I've seen where civilians have engaged soldiers and basically were very angry, and the soldiers turned around and walked away. Again, there's a disconnect here. This
right.
That's not an invader, okay? That sounds like more, what I'm seeing is they were sold is that they were a liberator. Okay, so if you're a liberator and you're coming into a country and you think you're now right, that you're saving somebody, mm-hmm. then you're not going to be going, from a military standpoint to annihilate everything in your path, because you think you're liberating. And so everything that I see, as I'm looking at these videos, is these soldiers think they're liberating, therefore they're very open, and they're not pushing arms, they're not shooting civilian, everybody that's moving. But in turn, they're doing actions that you would not normally do. As a soldier, that's an invader. If you're an invader, you're going about it an entirely different way. And it goes back to what you were saying, Terry. You go in, you do the bang, and you go for a capitulation as soon as possible.
Surrender as soon as you can.
Surrender. Right. So, but that's not what I'm seeing. And anyway, I'll let you.
No, I know, and that's not what any of us are seeing. And so some come to the surmise, I guess, or the conclusion that, well, Putin's not as strong as he has said. He really doesn't have that he has sort of a Barney Fife kind of soldier that are in these tanks, and they come up for air every now and then, because I have heard this. And he's not going to win this war. The Ukrainians are going to fight all the way, and they will survive. Putin is going to eat crow on the world stage. All of this I've heard. And I just wonder if this not coming in with a bang or a blitz or whatever military term is usually used, but coming in kind of with a objective that the soldiers think that they're there to liberate a country is also part of Putin's strategy. And the Ukrainians are sitting there and they go, no, we're going to fight to the death. And then, okay, you want to play hardball? I think Putin's thinking, okay, we'll come in a little bit stronger. And pretty soon the soldiers think, well, I'm at war here. I'm not liberating anybody. And then here comes more tanks. There's 40 miles of tanks that we saw. It just strikes me that he's coming to pummel even more, now hitting maternity wards, hospitals, schools, and civilian casualties, because I told you since 2008, I told you I needed this buffer region. And Ukraine has a history with Russia. Just go back in the history. We've been talking about this even before President Obama was in office. I told you I would do this, and now I'm doing it. So to me, I don't know the mind of Putin, but what we are seeing, and I totally agree with you, is not coming in and doing a fast slam dunk, and we win, and you better wave the white flag, or we'll take out all your civilian population. We're not seeing that. We're seeing what I look at as drip, 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 and it's a bloody drip, drip, drip. And that, I think, is by design. 1 minute before we take our first break.
Yeah, and I totally 100% agree with you, Terry, on what our perceptions that we're looking at. The other thing, and I'd like to talk about this a little bit later, is their tactics and how they're coming in. And it goes, again, it supports what we were talking about, liberators instead of invaders. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that a little bit, I think, in the next segment.
Okay, very good. And when we come back from the break, and you can think about this, General, a little bit at the break, I'm going to dovetail into the difference, and you know this as a military man, the difference between taking a city and holding a city and occupying a city. There's a big, big difference, especially if that city is not on your own terrain. This is a foreign area. So I want to get to that when we come back. This is Timeline with Terry. I'm Terry Gilbert. Be right back.
CTA is a call to action to all conservatives to save America from left-wing radicals.
Nearly 45% of the U.S. workforce already have plans for job hopping in 2021. Now, many of those 70 million job hoppers are just fed up, and they're ready to work somewhere else. Somewhere where they will be free. Maybe it's time for your talents to go to a city or a company that actually values your freedom. Post your resume on redballoon.work so that you can connect with this ever-growing list of free speech employers who would love to hire you.
All right, guys, you have signed up, right? You've joined freedomsquare.com. If you haven't, why not? This should have happened a decade ago. How did somebody not think of this earlier? If you're a business owner, we have a business directory to promote your business to patriots across the nation. So if you want to buy American, if you want to sell American, we have a business directory. Whatever it is, go now.
Join us in the fight for freedom. Welcome to Freedom Square.
Welcome back to Timeline with Terry. I'm on with Major General retired Troy Koch, and we are talking all things military with regard to this war, at least as much as we can get in for this hour. Before the break, you were going to continue your train of thought, General, and then I wanted you to dovetail into the difference between taking a city, and in this case, let's talk about the capital city, Kiev. I personally think, and today we're at, day 19 of this war. This taping is on day 19. I think Kiev will fall this week. That's just my gut. What do I know? I'm a civilian, but that's what I'm seeing because he's pressing in. And I think, unfortunately and regrettably and sadly and tragically, Ukraine will fall by the end of the month. But there's a long way between just coming in and taking a city and then occupying that city and holding that city. So go ahead with your last train of thought and then dovetail into that for us. Would you please, sir?
Absolutely, Terry. So, we were talking about a little bit about the tactics, again, liberator or invader.
Right.
So when I look at the tactics, they're going down roads, okay, and then you've got ambushes that the Ukrainians are using. They're taking out the lead tank. They're taking out, and this is actually one video that I watched. It was absolutely amazing. They took out the rear tank, and then instead of facing, again, in our own tactics, you would face into the enemy. And then, if you think you're overpowered, then you're going to move your tanks backwards, because the most powerful part of the tank is the front. That's not what they did. What they did was they took out the front, they took out the rear. The tanks turned and went across the other medium into another field adjacent to where the fire was coming.
What's that all about?
That I don't understand. I mean, that to me shows that the Russian army, really is not as tactically proficient as what we may think. Not only did I see the tanks doing that, I saw people getting out of the armored vehicles and running across the medium to the other side. So there's, that's
it's confusing, right? It's confusing.
That is not a trained force. That is not a, it's just the things that you're seeing on again, through their tactics and things. They're not entering this as an invader. They're kind of lackadaisical on how they're coming in, going into Kyiv. They're on roads. Again, if the Ukrainians had a large artillery backing, all they have to do is just go right down those roads and they would blow everything to Kingdom Come, because it's all lined up. It's nice. It's stacked neatly. That's not the way that's not the way you prosecute. At least that's not the way I learned how to prosecute. Mm-hmm. You want to distribute your forces, and then you want to move in. I mean, there's some times where you have to use, avenues of approaches such as the road, but you also need to be very in tune to the fact that that's a great place for an ambush. Where are your ambushes going to be? And they are just getting, again, looking at video. They're getting annihilated.
So you conclude from this what you have seen, just from the pictures and video, not what the talking heads are saying. You conclude that Putin's army is not as strong as you were led to believe. Is that a fair statement? Is that accurate?
That is exactly accurate. That, and again, when I do not know, and Russians may not use this term, but when we talk about rules of engagement, if a soldier's rules of engagement are basically, as we go in, you cannot shoot back unless shot at. Okay, or when we entered into Iraq, the rules of engagement were you fire first. Again, you see an enemy, you see somebody holding a weapon, you fire, and you take out that enemy. There's an enormous difference on that rules of engagement. And so when I look at some of the rules of, if we call it rules of engagement, the Russian soldiers are holding back from the engagements, which would, again, tend to lead me to they're under a liberator policy. That's how it was sold to them. That's, what they think they are to be popular, okay, instead of what the Kremlin is actually saying is that they're invaders. And what's happening is that now that Putin is not making the gains that he wants to, now they're getting tougher in certain areas. And it's as the orders are changing and they're bringing those cells, in, that those it's changing the way that they're prosecuting
this war. Do you think Kiev will fall soon? We're in day 19 for this audience, just so I put a timeline on it.
So we're in day 19, and when we talk about, there's an enormous difference between fighting in the country and fighting in a city. The thing that, and again, we can go back many wars, that where armies do not want to get tied down in is in cities. Because your tanks are no longer formidable. Your armor is no longer formidable because, again, people can be in buildings. They can set up, ambushes, on corners. Again, because you're channeled. You get into all of your power gets channeled into streets. And so every cross street is a possible weapons trap.
Sure.
Where somebody can fire into you, and now you've got a tank that's blocking the way that's on fire, and you're not going to go around it.
I see.
So not only is the tank now blocking the intersection for anybody to go past it, but now what you do is soldiers come from around. Again, the infantry soldier now is extremely powerful because they can come from buildings and be on rooftops and everything else and interdict that column now that it's stopped. And just, wreak havoc. So when we look at city fighting is not something you want to do because it can be door to door based off of the resistance. The Germans didn't want to do it. We didn't want to do it in Baghdad, and it's just.
And yet, wouldn't you agree this is where this war is at right now? It's almost like, if I could ask President Putin, did you want this scenario now at day 19? You did? Because now you've got Ukrainians at every little window, every little corner. They've got sniper fire ready to go. And you want this? Was that your objective? It just strikes me it still strikes me he's going to take the city. He's full steam ahead. It's just that the full steam seems to be, again, a drip, drip, drip. And it's going to be tough before Kiev falls. But he's there. He's right around it.
Well, I think one of the things, Terry, that President Putin didn't take into effect is that the Ukrainians were going to put up this kind of resistance. I believe Putin thought he would come in. Ukrainians were talk, and then they would basically capitulate. Basically surrender is what capitulation is.
Sure.
And then it would be done and would be over with, and they would set up a puppet state the way that it had been over 10 years ago. Okay, and they would have status quo. Even though it would be called Ukraine, it would be really just like in the Soviet bloc, all those puppet states, Romania, Latvia, Estonia, Bulgaria, they were all buffer states that were turned into the Warsaw Pact, protecting Russia from the West.
Right.
And I really think, again, based off of the things that I see, and I'm not there, so again, I can only see what, tell you what I see, is that I don't think he expected the Ukrainian people to fight the way that they are. I don't think he expected the resistance that he's getting. And so when he enters into Kyiv, okay, that's going to be a whole nother animal that he is not expecting. And so when you get into city fighting, basically what you're having to do is you're going to have to take every single building. And if they've got consistent resistance, you're almost going to have to level a lot of that. Okay.
And if he's leveling hospitals and maternity wards and daycare centers and schools and playgrounds, he has no problem trying to level it. But I agree with you. It's hard to find out. It's hard to think what is the objective here, because it just seems to be so slow. And maybe he's tried to show the world, I'm still ready to negotiate. And that's why it's slow. But in the meantime, his name is mud across the world, and that's putting it nicely.
I would 100% agree with you, Terry.
Okay.
Coming across very well.
Here's a question. If attacking civilians is a war crime, and this is what Vice President Harris has said in recent days, then the unintentionally attacking civilians wouldn't be, right? So could he make the case, and this is down the road for him being prosecuted as a war criminal, could he make the case that, well, I didn't aim to attack women and children, I didn't aim to attack civilians, I didn't aim to attack farmers, but they're just collateral damage. Vice President Harris said, intentionally attacking civilians is a war crime. So, unintentionally attacking could be some of his defense, right?
Absolutely. I mean, any time that we're, and you can look at, when we were both in Afghanistan and Iraq, when civilians were unintentionally hit, it was an immediate news blitz.
Sure.
Over, where we write, there was an investigation that went on. We looked and to see where we were wrong. Were we wrong? Did we take out the right targets, or did we not take out the right targets? And we weren't always right every single time. And in fact, that was one of the things that we were always very concerned about, because when unintended effects happen through civilian casualties, it turns the civilian population against you, not for you.
Of course.
Okay. So again, when you're looking at this, what's going on over in Ukraine, the cities that he's taken, I've seen a lot of protesting going on, but they're not doing anything against the protesters, which goes into that. Again, I want to keep on going back to that liberator.
That's a good point. Yeah, insightful.
Okay. Whereas if he'd had the same the same thing going on in Mother Russia, in Moscow, how that would have been handled. Okay, they would never allow for protesting to go on against the war. In fact, if I recall, I've heard some reports that they've even shut down Facebook and things of that nature in Russia.
I think that's right. I think that's right. There's no internet there anymore. And in the very early days when protests were happening, those people were arrested.
Absolutely.
Instantly. General, what do you think President Xi in China is thinking, watching Putin's actions at this time, now that we're in day 19 of this war? What do you think President Xi's assessment is? And I'm getting the red light that we're down to a minute, but so summarize what you think that would be, answer it, and then we can elaborate more on the backside of this break.
Sure. I think China is watching very intently on what we are doing, how we're handling ourselves, how we're engaging, this whole scenario. Because if he watches, then it's going to be it's going to be showing him what will happen is if China goes ahead and pushes in an area where we don't want them to push. It's a distraction.
Yeah. I've got some thoughts on it, and I'll ask these thoughts to you when we come back after this break. It's Timeline with Terry. We are now into day 19 of this war, at least as of this taping. I need to say that so that if people are seeing this down the road, they know where we're at. It's Timeline with Terry. I'm Terry Gilbert. Quick break. Be right back with the General. Don't go away.
CTA is a call to action to all conservatives to save America from left-wing radicals.
nearly 45% of the US workforce already have plans for job hopping in 2021. Now, many of those 70 million job hoppers are just fed up and they're ready to work somewhere else, somewhere where they will be free. Maybe it's time for your talents to go to a city or a company that actually values your freedom. Post your resume on redballoon.work so that you can connect with this ever-growing list of free speech employers who would love to hire you.
All right, guys, you have signed up, right? You've joined freedomsquare.com. If you haven't, why not? This should have happened a decade ago. How did somebody not think of this earlier? If you're a business owner, we have a business directory to promote your business to patriots across the nation. So if you want to buy American, if you want to sell American, we have a business directory. Whatever it is, go now.
Join us in the fight for freedom. Welcome to Freedom Square.
We're back on Timeline with Terry. I'm Terry Gilberg. We've been talking in that second segment about what you think, General, President Xi would be thinking watching Putin at this time. Now, I've never met President Putin. I've never met President Xi. But I do get this. They both have the long view, right? We've heard that about China for so long. It's the long view. And in the year, 2035 or something, when the Belt and Road Initiative will be done, then there'll be another initiative. President Xi is really building his legacy. Well, so is President Putin. So they both have the long view, and they were very, very chummy at the Olympics. And I said, actually to my daughter over Christmas time, I said, if President Putin moves in Ukraine, I will bet you he won't upstage the Olympics. He will move about the day after or so. And sure enough, I was right. I didn't want him to, but I was right. Which signals to me, President Xi is sitting back and going, okay, Putin, let's see what you're made of. And they may be sort of chummy on the world stage, but I think President Xi is sitting back and going, you know, I don't know about him. He looks like he's got a lot of bravado. We're helping him financially because they are. He's not necessarily my best friend, but he's the friend I have right now, and China is Putin's best friend. I mean, they've got this collaboration. But I still think Xi is sitting there and going, let's just see how he handles this. And if he goes in with a blitz, Xi might say, I can go in with Taiwan with a blitz. I now think because it wasn't a blitz, it wasn't quick, he didn't dominate that airspace, just like we said at the top of this conversation, Xi might be sitting back and going, the fight Ukraine is putting up might be the fight Taiwan is putting up. What do you think?
So when we look and before we went on break, I think that China is very much watching how we, the United States, is prosecuting this. What we're doing, how we're handling ourselves, what we're willing to do and what we're not willing to do. Again, we're not stepping over boundaries. We are very concerned. There's a nuclear power. Again, Russia's a nuclear power. The United States is a nuclear power. China's a nuclear power. So again, how we handle this is kind of what we're doing it with kid gloves. So in saying that, going and threading the needle with Taiwan, China has also been pushing certain boundaries with Taiwan. Okay, they had an overflight not too long ago.
I recall that.
Now,
about 9 planes, if I recall right.
Did Taiwan shoot them down? They did not. Okay, so again, it's no different. I kind of look at some of this. It's no different than when we raise our kids. Our kids push boundaries. And they're going to push that boundary until, we say, no, you're not, stop. Okay, when we draw that line and we push back, they stop. And they know how far they can go. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to push it again later on down the road. But for right now, we're okay. The same thing, I think, is applying. And I think sometimes making it simple is easier for people to understand. That's exactly what China is doing with Taiwan. There was another incident where a plane went down in the sea, and they were pushing boundaries again. Could they go in there and run rescue missions in for this plane? Again, it's all just pushing. It's pushing, seeing how far they can go before Taiwan actually does shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into the aspect of, is Taiwan actually going to, what kind of country is Taiwan going to be if China does invade? That's the same ways I think Ukraine is going to be.
That's another bottle of wine conversation. Maybe for another, that's a long conversation. All right, so about, where were we? About day 10? Maybe day 7 in this war to day 10, Putin does a big frump, nuclear weapons are on high alert, right? And they're still on high alert. And of course, I paid attention. I sat up and went, what are we looking at here? And then nothing. And then he's also said, well, he didn't come right out and say it, but there was talk about more cyber attacks. Well, Ukraine is used to cyber attacks. I mean, Putin does all kinds of cyber attacks. What do you think about his next strategy if Kiev doesn't come down right away, or he's trying to drip this war out? What's in his mind with regard to cyber attacks, General, and with regard to an EMP attack? Electromagnetic pulse, to our audience that doesn't know.
Right. So I want to go on another string, though. Instead of those, one of the things he's also brought up is, and this is his MO. Okay, he's brought up chemical.
He has.
And I'm more concerned about the chemical issue.
Yes, he has.
He's brought that up. There's a good, and he's blaming, or he's already blaming the Ukrainians of doing it. But in reality, what he's done in the past is that's exactly what he's done. So, again, if you get into a protracted war, especially when you're in city fighting, how do you clear a city? Chemical weapons do a pretty good job.
They sure do, if you got them.
And you don't have the gas masks and the chemical equipment, which Ukrainians, I don't believe, do. But
or not enough.
When you're watching the Russians come in, they do have their chemical gear, already on them. That doesn't mean they're gonna, it's gonna be lobbed in. But again, it's no different than what we do in the United States. We always bring our chemical gear in case that.
So is it your thinking that that's his next step? If Kiev is really tough, then that he's going to pull the trigger on that through chemical weapons.
I think if he uses chemical weapons, he's going to try to make it look like the Ukrainians did it first. Mm-hmm. And that's the ploy. Now, I've listened to some people talk about this and they're right on track. Whenever he's projected that, and talked about somebody else, they've actually been the ones, and it's been proven that they've been the ones that used them.
Right. So it's that disinformation. It's projection on the other guy, what you've really done yourself.
Absolutely. So you can point the finger the other way and say, well, they did it first.
Right.
And or even blame them for the actual attack itself. Because what happens through time is you lose the ability to actually identify what actually happened. And so, I think the nuclear side is a ruse. Again, it's just it's
saber rattling.
Tactical nukes, absolutely they do. I mean, they had tactical nukes. We had tactical nukes. Again, we knew both sides could shoot nukes, and that's what prevented us from doing it. Has it been talked about in the past? Absolutely. Has it happened? No, because I think both countries. I want to say, and there is a part of hope here, is that both countries still understand that the nuclear option is never an option. There is no winners in a nuclear option. One, when you use nuclear weapons, the territory that you've won, you can't use anyway because nobody can go in there.
You've obliterated it. Yeah.
Right. So,
Right.
I mean, who wins? You don't even win the territory because the territory is unusable. So, you know, that's something that I think there's enough respect between the sides that no side would use it, even though we may be talked. But again, that's a rouge. You know, that's pushing boundaries. You're trying to make your opponent fear what you can do, not that you're necessarily going to do it.
That's
so
right.
if you put that question mark in somebody's mind, then that just may be enough to keep them away. And that's not going towards the Ukrainians. That's going towards NATO and the United States. That's where that's going.
Speaking of NATO, there are those people that say, look, Putin is only saying that he does not want Ukraine to be part of NATO. What he really is all about is that he's going to take Ukraine because he's a kleptomaniac. He took Crimea, the Donbas area, when he was vice mayor in St. Petersburg. He cooked a lot of the books and took a lot of the people's money for himself and for the oligarchs. He's a very wealthy guy. He just grabs. And he's a thief. That's what he is. So this idea that he's putting out to the world, I've got to have a buffer zone, and Ukraine's the biggest buffer zone, is a bunch of BS. That's what some people say. It isn't. The mind of Putin is, even if he does take the Ukraine, and it looks like he is going to do this, even if it's a slow war, a long war, and he's going slowly at it, then he still is buffered up next to NATO countries.
Right.
What do you say about that, General? Because as a strategy, if you're out there grabbing countries, and Ukraine is not a NATO country, and you say, oh, it's because, I've got to have this buffer zone, and then you take it anyway, you're still going to have NATO in your backyard, in the backyard of Ukraine.
Right, but I think the other thing we need to look at, Terry, though, is what's different between Ukraine and Poland. Okay, it's where it's location.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at Ukraine is connected into the Black Sea.
Correct.
Okay? Without Ukrainian property, Russia loses that access, and so therefore, why they took what they did a few years back.
Are you referring to the Crimea? The Crimea.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
And so that's the strategic part of what Ukraine is to Russia. I believe. Again, the Caucasus has always been an area of
you need that advantage there in the sea, right?
Absolutely.
And the Crimea is a peninsula, so now he's got access.
Right. And Crimea also had that one little area where, again, it allows ships to go in and go out of, and so that was what was connected to Russia before. Now owning Crimea, they don't have to worry about it because they have full access to the Black Sea. And when we talk about NATO, and yes, Russia is abutting up to a number of NATO countries, and that's the reason why those countries, again, all those countries that have joined NATO used to be in the Russian bloc.
Of course.
Okay, those were countries that were established after World War I. Okay, that Russia was supposed to assist as a part of the pact after World War II. Russia was supposed to help those countries get back on their feet and then allow them to become democratic and have their own votes, and they would run their own countries. That's not what Russia did. They made them into the Warsaw Pact. They oversaw their governments. They put puppets in those governments. Again, so it made that buffer so that what happened to Russia before, okay, during World War II, would not happen again. And Russia has always been very uncomfortable as a country with having enemies on their, if you want to say enemy on the gate.
In their backyard.
They want to have those buffers so that what they're able to do is be able to raise their armies so that they do not allow a foreign country to make it into their territory, into Russian territory. And a lot of that fear comes again from what happened in World War II. You know, during those two operations, one when they went into almost took Moscow, and the second when the German army plowed through and went to Stalingrad. Again, there was now, and we can go. I'm not going to go into history because I'm a lover of history. I think when you look at history, it's tell signs of what can happen if we study it. Again, it's not going to happen exactly, but it does display certain attitudes and actions that countries display even today as you evaluate what they're doing, their natures. Okay, and Russia has that nature. So again, going back to, you know, maybe why did we allow these countries to become NATO, go into NATO? It's for the protection of exactly what happened to them after World War II with the Russian bloc.
And Ukraine has begged to be a member of NATO. Almost, I think I'm right, the length of time that Russia has said, oh, no, you won't. Oh, no, you won't. They've wanted, and we have, I think we meaning NATO countries, specifically the United States, and Great Britain, United Kingdom as well, has said, oh, yes, well, we'll help, and you're NATO-like, and you're, you know, almost, I think the word is some kind of a subsidiary of these NATO powers, but they're not in. And so, you know, the argument can be made that we've dangled the carrot. Oh, you're going to get in, you're going to get in, you're going to get in, and then, of course, they're not in. So we're down to about a minute, and before we wrap this up, I'd like you to talk a little bit about your run, your political office run. I promised I would mention it, and I wish you the best in the run. Go ahead.
Absolutely, Terry. You know, it's something that I've wanted to do. You know, I've had the opportunity to be around a lot of politicians, and I was always told as an officer in the Army, if you don't like what's going on, get involved and make a change. You know, when you have the opportunity, you need to get involved and you need to make a change. And so, you know, looking at our community in Meade County, Kentucky, this was an opportunity to go ahead and run on a Republican ticket and make a change. Our county is in a very strategic point. We have an enormous flat steel plant that's coming in, and it's changing the way Meade County was. And, you know, in our county can go one or two ways. You know, we can stick back and not catch up to where we need to be, or we can look at this from as we were talking strategically, and place things where they need to be. So again, we're not creating long-term problems, okay, that you can't fix later on, right, you know, by making short-term effects. Mm-hmm. So I'm extremely excited. It's been a great run. And we're continuing to plow on, you know, vote Troy.
And it is, vote for Troy. It's judge executive, right? Do I have that right? Yes. Okay. But not a judge as in the legal sense.
No, not a judge in the legal sense. It's a title. But what the judge executive basically is he or she is the CEO of the county. So manages all the county budgets, you know, road department, EMS, and those types of things that support the county. And then you have your different districts that roll in and you make, you know, ordinances and laws and so on, again, to represent the county. And I'm looking forward to being a public official. I've been, you know, in reality, I've been doing this public thing now for quite a long time. I've been a servant warrior for 37 and a half years in my military career. So I think this just kind of rolls into what life is about. And I'm really excited about this new phase in my life.
Well, now you can serve in a different way. And I hope you come back and visit with us again.
Yes, ma'am, I sure will. All you need to do is ask.
Yeah, well, we'll have you back. It won't be right away. We'll see how the war is going, and we can talk more war strategy. We can maybe even talk about your political career and how that's going too. So I invite you back. We'll have to get with the producers and figure that out down the road. Thank you for spending time with us, General.
Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you for your kind words, and I look forward to doing this again.
You bet. This was very insightful. It's not every day that I bring somebody on and they talk strategy. Most of the time they want to talk politics about it, and they've got the better political philosophy. But this really was contained to strategy, and I appreciate that angle from you. Thank you very much. This has been Timeline with Terry. I'm Terry Gilbert. We'll see you tomorrow on another edition of Timeline with Terry, and when we pick up another timeline topic. See you then. Thank you for joining us.